They laughed while I was still saying his name. The cloth in my hand trembled against my knuckles. It was the same white handkerchief Robert used to carry, his initials faded in the corner, and I could feel each stitch as if it were a verb. The organ swallowed the pauses between the hymns. The smell of wax and lilies hung thick as breath. Outside, the Florida heat clung to the church walls, but inside, the air felt cold. Around me, the murmurs were a wet, shifting thing, whispered condolences, then a ripple of something else, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, quick glances, the little staccato chuckles that say, "Without him, what will she do?" I pressed the handkerchief to my mouth to stop my own voice. The old brass clock at the back of the church ticked like a reminder that time kept moving whether they respected it or not. A woman near the back nudged her husband and mouthed a word I didn't want to hear. I told myself not to look, but their faces slotted into my field of vision one after another. Carolyn with a pursed lip, Eleanor's nose lifting like a judge's, Victor's jaw working as if he were chewing on the idea of debt. "Poor Louise," someone said, but the tone was thin, made of pity and profit wrapped together. My son Michael stood beside me, his hand on my arm, trying to hold me upright. He looked small in the suit. He looked to the world like a dutiful son. He leaned close and whispered, "They don't mean it, Ma." But he knew they did. We both did. I had spent my life mumbling acquiescence around this family, smiles softening their rebukes at holiday tables, nods softening decisions I wasn't allowed to make. Robert would retreat to his study when things got loud. He would close that door. In the beginning, it felt like safety. Later, it felt like a sentence. The study, polished, smelling of lemon oil and old paper, was his sanctum. Guests were politely diverted from it, like they were being shepherded around a relic. The lock on that door became its own punctuation, a pause in conversation, a little bow to him. Nobody ever asked why. Now the pews were full of people parsing my grief for amusement. Someone's phone lit up, someone else laughed behind a hand. The worst barbs were the soft ones, the ones you miss until they're aimed at you. "She always was sheltered," Carolyn said to a neighbor, loud enough for me to catch. "Poor thing, never handled much on her own." A ripple of approval followed, and the church air grew thicker. They weren't comforting me, they were weighing me. When the priest ended the reading, I let the people go first. It was smaller that way, less show. We walked out beneath a blazing Florida sky that felt almost insulting in its brightness. The crowd scattered into cars and conversations where my name was just punctuation. I sat in my own car and felt the whole world tilt a degree that would not straighten. At home, the living room still smelled faintly of Robert, aftershave, pipe tobacco that used to sit in a little tin on the mantel, the lemon polish on his desk. The ceiling fan hummed its slow, lazy Florida circle, indifferent to the funeral. On the coffee table, someone had placed a small stack of envelopes, funeral notices, a card from a neighbor, a flyer for the reception. Beneath them, almost tucked away like a shy thing, lay a cream envelope with my name in Robert's hand. My fingers hovered. The handwriting, steady, at the end a little loopier, was a private voice I'd missed all morning. I closed the front door slowly, turned the deadbolt with a soft click, and sat on the edge of the sofa. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single short note and a small brass key on a thin chain. The note read, "Do not let them bend you. The study is yours. Everything inside is yours. They will mock you. They will beg. They will try to take. Do not bend. The words were simple, and they landed like a weight, not a command so much as a map drawn in a precise, intimate hand. I had questions, hundreds of them, but the key warmed against my palm the way a true thing warms, certain, patient. If you want to know what that key unlocked, stay with me. People imagine grief as a quiet thing, a private fog that settles. In our family, grief was currency. It opened doors, not to sympathy, but to appetite. Over the years, I had become a kind of family easement, my opinions not taken, my observations smiled away, my suggestions gently rerouted to later. When Robert complained about a bill, the conversation glided past me and landed on the table between the men. If I asked a question at dinner, someone would answer like they'd planned to all along, then send me back to the kitchen to warm plates. I learned to fold myself into the margins. I let the loud voices move like the tide and measured my days by smaller sounds, the clink of cutlery, the whistle of the kettle, the creak of the back door in the Florida humidity. Robert knew this about me. He knew how my shoulders pulled up when a word stung. He learned the exact angle at which a smile turned into a sneer. And somewhere in the slow geography of our lives, he decided to make sure those sneers couldn't touch the thing he wanted most to protect, me. I thought marriage meant you shared a house and a bed, maybe life insurance, and an understanding about who took out the trash. For Robert, it meant something else. He spent his afternoons in that study, not escaping me, but building a place I could enter when the time came. There were file cabinets behind that door that nobody asked about, a ledger in modest script, deeds in simple folders, ordinary objects, paper, ink, signatures that everyone else in that family had forgotten were powerful. That note, "Do not bend," was both counsel and prophecy. Reading it felt like being entrusted with a small, dangerous secret that demanded steadiness. The first night I opened the study, I did it at 11 o'clock. The house held its breath. The grandfather clock in the hallway counted my steps. The key slid into the lock like a promise. The door swung inward with a quiet, dignified sigh. Inside, dust motes spun in the lamplight. The desk still held his blotter and an empty mug. The room smelled of lemon oil and something else, vanilla maybe, the scent of a life carefully lived. There were parcels bound in twine and a small metal box with its own keyhole. In the top drawer, beneath a stack of invoices, lay the thing that would change everything. A sealed envelope stamped Last Will and Testament, notarized, and next to it, a small, battered voice recorder with a red dot that suggested it had been used recently. I sat and let the silence settle around that recorder. The idea of hearing Robert's voice after the silence of the funeral felt like trespass and solace wrapped together. I remembered how he always slowed his cadence when he wanted to be understood, the late arriving laugh that could rearrange a room. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. "Hello, Lou," his voice said, soft, steady, exactly the way he said my name across the kitchen table when he wanted me to really listen. "If you're listening to this, I'm probably gone. That doesn't mean you are alone." He cleared his throat. "The study is yours, all of it. The house, the bungalow and the keys, the accounts, it's all under your name. I've talked to our lawyer. It's notarized. I know they will step forward. They'll say they didn't know. They'll say we were thin on the truth. Don't let them make you small. Keep the papers. Don't sign anything without a lawyer. And Louise, do not bend." His voice wavered on the last line, as if the recorder had caught the crack at the edge of his bravery. He sounded like the man who'd let the world think he was the only one making decisions, and now he was handing me the wheel. The will itself was straightforward in its legal language: bequests, transfers, signatures, the notary seal. It named me primary inheritor and executor. Attached were schedules, property deeds, account numbers, a ledger that recorded payments. The ledger had annotations, sharp, neat entries that hinted at where money had gone, to whom checks had been written, and in one place, a note boxed in ink. The boxed note caught the lamplight. Payments withdrawn, see attached. Attached, indeed, were copies of bank statements. There were transfers that didn't correspond to repairs or medical bills. Names appeared in the margins, familiar names, next to amounts signed in a hand that wasn't Robert's. My mouth went dry. Heat rose to my face in slow waves. The proof I'd been chasing with my gut for years, the quiet whispers, the late-night sighs Robert had released into his drink, was spread out like bones on the desk. I felt both betrayed and vindicated in the same breath. For decades, my concerns had been blunted with, "We know better. He's old-fashioned. It's nothing." Here it was, a written trail tracing money where it shouldn't have gone. I didn't shout. I closed the drawer and held the envelope against my chest. Robert's words, "Don't bend," kept my hand steady. This was not the time for spectacle. It was the time for order. The first week after the funeral, the family showed their colors. At first, they feigned concern. Eleanor dropped by with a casserole and a smile that could have been made of glass. She put a hand on my shoulder too long, eyes wandering toward the study door. "You must be exhausted, dear," she said. "Let me help you with the reception, with the paperwork. It's a lot for you." Her voice was sugar. Her fingers left a bruise. "Thank you," I said. I did not ask her to stay. Carolyn came bearing sympathy and a list of helpful suggestions: how to manage paperwork, which accounts to call, a list of legal clinics she thought might be useful. She used the word manage the way some people use a bandage: quick, tidy, and temporary. Her concern had the neatness of a budget worksheet. Victor's visit was colder. He sat in Robert's armchair as if it had been warming up for him. "Louise," he said without preface, "we should talk about the property. It's a mess to have all this tied up with one person. If you think you can't handle it, I'd be willing to step in as a sort of manager, keep everything in good form." There was the offhandedness of someone offering a service while his eyes mapped out what he planned to own. "Manager?" I repeated. "You mean you want to control it for me?" He smiled, and the smile was, as Robert used to say, the kind that sells cars. It lit the creases in his cheeks and hid the shadow underneath. No, it's about making sure you're not taken advantage of. We'll help. We can sort it out." David never came with casseroles. He sent messages. He called Michael late at night. Whispers leaked like a slow faucet. The same voices that had smirked at the funeral now circled like gulls over a fishing pier. They offered small loans, caretaking plans, suggestions about joint accounts for safety. They asked about the study, about the key, about what the will said. Each question was measured, rehearsed, delivered with that tone of generosity that smells just a bit like gasoline. I could have given in. It would have been easier at first, safer. I thought of Robert's voice on that recorder: "Do not bend." He had known their patterns, the way a gardener knows where the frost will bite. The recorder and the ledger were a baton he'd passed into my hand. When I told them the study and everything in it was legally mine, the change in their faces was almost invisible at first. A tightening around the eyes, a small twitch in the mouth. They moved from helpful to practical with the smoothness of people who'd rehearsed both roles. "Are you sure it's all in order?" Ella Lanner asked, like she was checking a seam. "Can I see the documents? Something like that shouldn't be kept secret, Louise. We can review it together." "It's notarized," I said. Robert saw a lawyer. It's in order. Maybe we should have an independent person look it over, Carolyn suggested. She said independent, but meant ours. Don't sign anything, I told them, not without a lawyer. You're upset, Carolyn answered, as if the two concepts were interchangeable. You should rest. Let us handle the details. The first actual violence came a week later. I found a black smear under the study window and a scatter of tiny pebbles on the sill. An attempted pry, shallow and amateurish, the sort of thing you do in a hurry, in the dark. My heart did a slow, even roll. Someone had tried the window. They'd come while the Florida night pressed heavy against the glass and left in a way that announced itself without fully crossing the line. I called the neighbor, who swore he'd heard nothing. Then I called the police. They took notes under the soft whir of the ceiling fan and told me to secure the premises. They were polite, but their pens hovered in that way that says, "This is small and you are fragile." It's always small until it isn't. After the window, there were other things. A tire slashed in the driveway one bad dawn, a smear of paint on Robert's mailbox, a realtor's flyer stuck to the front door with words like "act fast" and "cash offer." They were meant to intimidate, to unnerve, to make me feel unsafe in my own house so I'd hand over the key. I slept with the study door locked from the inside, the brass key under my pillow like a talisman. Michael's calls had a different music. He tried to be a bridge, but he was dry wood. "Ma," he'd say, "they're your family. Maybe if you—" His voice always hit the wall I'd finally started building. He wasn't cruel. He was afraid. Afraid of losing the people he'd grown up with. Afraid to choose. Family visits shifted from sweet offers to gilt-edged persuasion. They'd bring food, sit in my kitchen, then angle themselves toward the study. They acted like they were helping me sort paperwork when what they really wanted was to rearrange my life with their hands on my desk. I started documenting everything. I taped my phone to the mantle and let the camera run when someone came by. I wrote notes. I made copies of bank statements and placed them in a locked metal box I carried like a secret child. I found a lawyer who had been Robert's friend and showed him what I had: the ledger, the will, the recorder. He listened and nodded, the way someone does who has seen this dance before. "If the will's in order and the recorded testimony is admissible," he said, "then you have the law on your side. But prepare. Document everything. If they try anything, we'll show the pattern." It was the first sober, neutral sentence I'd heard in weeks. They cornered me in the living room a month after the funeral. A storm had rolled in off the Gulf, windows rattling like applause. Eleanor was the first to speak. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. She stood with her hands empty this time, no casserole, no props. Around her, the others arranged themselves like clouds, Carolyn at her side, Victor in the doorway, David on the arm of the sofa like he lived there. Only Michael hovered near the window. "We're family," Carolyn said. "This is tearing us apart." "Lou, do you know what tearing me apart looks like?" I asked. My voice was low. The handkerchief was stitched inside my dress pocket, a small private shield against my ribs. "It looks like people measuring what they can get. It looks like people laughing at my tears in church. It looks like pebbles under my window in the middle of the night." For a moment, they looked surprised, as if I'd brought the wrong script to their rehearsal. Then Victor's jaw set. "You don't get to point fingers, Louise. You have no idea how complicated things are. Robert handled everything." "He did," I said, "and he left instructions for me. If you have questions about those papers, we can take them to our lawyer." "Which lawyer?" David asked. "Your lawyer? Your husband's buddy?" I looked at their faces, the same ones that had pulled me into game nights and posed with me in family photos. Their mouths were familiar. Their intentions were not. "I will not sign anything," I said. "I will not hand over the key. If you believe there's wrongdoing, bring evidence to court, but you will not intimidate me in my own home." There was a pause long enough for the rain to climb and fall down the glass. Michael stepped forward, hand half raised. Maybe there's a way to compromise. We can manage the property. We can—" "No." The word felt like a door closing. "No managing," I said. "You have a choice. You can work through our lawyer, or you can leave." Eleanor laughed, a short, brittle sound like a teacup breaking in the sink. "You're so dramatic," she said. "You make everything into a scene." "I have always been quiet," I said. "You counted on that. Don't confuse my silence for weakness." They left with slow, tight anger. No slammed doors, just that careful closing that says this isn't over. That night, I set the brass key on the nightstand and stared at it in the dark. For years, doors had been closed on me. Now the question was whether I had the courage to close some myself. By morning, there was fresh paint on the mailbox and another tire sliced. The police took more photos. My lawyer advised me to keep everything in a safe place and to file for temporary protective orders if it escalated. "This is evidence of intent," he said. "They're trying to force your hand." One evening, I found the study latch bent. Someone had tried to work the lock and failed. It wasn't professional. It was desperate. In another life, I might have confronted them in the driveway, shouted until the neighbors came out onto their porches. But I had a recorder, a notarized will, a ledger, and a lawyer. This didn't need fireworks. It needed proof. So I closed doors instead. I locked the study door. I closed and latched the windows. I turned away cousins at the porch and spoke to them through the screen. I shut the front door gently but firmly when their voices grew sharp. Every time I closed a door on them, I felt a little more like I was finally stepping into my own house. On a Wednesday with a metallic sky, they made the mistake of trying to stage a scene at my doorstep. Eleanor and Carolyn came with a cluster of cousins and a practiced fury. They wanted papers. They wanted the key. They wanted me to be small again. We stood at the threshold. The study door was closed behind me like a held breath. The brass key lay cold in my palm. "I will not be bullied," I told them. "If you think there's wrongdoing, go to the proper authorities. If you want to know what Robert left, ask the lawyer. But you will not break my windows, slash my tires, or stand here and threaten me." Eleanor's laugh was thin. "You have no idea what you're asking for. This will ruin us. It will ruin you." I thought of Robert's voice, the ledger, the notary stamp. I slipped the brass key into my pocket like a coin of truth. "My tears in that church didn't ruin you," I said. "Your choices did. I'm just closing the doors you thought were always open." Thunder rolled behind them like an answer. They left eventually, pounding down the steps, and the Florida sky finally opened. Rain washed the driveway clean. I closed the front door and turned the deadbolt with slow, deliberate pressure. That night, I slept with the metal box of documents beside me on the bed, like a small breathing animal. They came back quieter 2 days later with lawyers. "Transparency," Carolyn said as she sat on my sofa, her own folder in hand. "If there's nothing to hide, let us see. Let us be part of this." I had my stage set for them now. I placed the metal box on the coffee table, the dull string still tied. The recorder sat face up, its red dot lifeless but dangerous. "These are Robert's papers," I said. "If you want to look at them, you can do it in the presence of our lawyer." They bristled. "Do you expect us to just," Victor started. "I expect," I interrupted, "that people who claim concern will show it by respecting the process." Carolyn pulled out her own copies, selective statements she'd found while helping, shards of a story. "These show transfers," she said, "repairs, family needs. Why didn't you notice? Why didn't you act?" "I did," I said. "Robert did. He wrote a ledger. We have an accountant ready to testify. If you think there are legitimate explanations, present them under oath." The word oath flickered across her face like someone had opened a door to a room she didn't want to see. They left again, this time promising court. I'd been waiting for that. A hearing was set at the county courthouse, just off the main street where the palm trees lean into the ocean breeze. In a town like ours, the courthouse is part justice, part theater. People came on their lunch breaks, pretending they were there for errands. I wore a simple navy suit Robert had once admired and tucked his handkerchief inside the jacket so it wouldn't flutter for anyone's camera. Their lawyers talked fast about undue influence, capacity, family stewardship. They tried to paint a picture of an old man manipulated by an overprotected wife. My lawyer didn't bother with drama. He handed the judge the will, the notarized affidavits, the ledger, the chain of custody for the recorder. Then he asked the clerk to play a short clip of Robert's voice. The recorder crackled. "Hello, Lou," came that familiar tone. "If you're listening to this, I'm probably gone." The judge watched me as much as she listened to him, the kind of watching that measures whether what she's hearing fits what she's seeing. Then the forensic accountant took the stand. He wasn't emotional. He was devastating. "These transfers correspond to accounts controlled by Miss Mercer and Miss Dawes," he said, indicating Eleanor and Carolyn. He walked the court through dates, check images, and the ledger notes that match them. Tiny amounts at first, then more. Cross-examination made them wobble. Victor tried to sound wounded, but under simple questions, who authorized these? Where's the documentation? His answers frayed. Emails surfaced, Carolyn's words read aloud. "Maybe we can move a little here and there for the family. He won't notice." In black and white, under fluorescent lights, their concern looked a lot like taking. They tried one last trick, arguing Robert had been confused, but his doctor's records didn't back that up. In the months he'd signed the will and recorded his message, his mind had been described as oriented, competent. The judge spoke quietly when she ruled. She validated the will, she admitted the recording, she ordered a full accounting and denied their attempt to freeze or overturn my inheritance. In plain language, the doors they were trying to pry open stayed shut. The legal process didn't end there. Discovery pulled more threads, more statements, more checks, more explanations that didn't hold. Some relatives were ordered to repay sums. Some claims were dismissed for lack of evidence. One cousin was sanctioned for a frivolous motion that had been nothing more than legal harassment. There were no handcuffs, no prime-time trial, just paperwork, orders, and consequences written in ink. In a small Florida town, that's enough. People talk. People remember whose names were read out in court. Neighbors who had once smirked at my tears now avoided my eyes at the bakery. Others came up with quiet apologies and offers to help trim my hedges. The family that once assumed my house was a shared resource now thought twice before driving down my street. Michael was the last to knock. He came one evening while the sky turned the color of old pennies over the Gulf. He stood at the gate for a long minute, then walked up to the porch carrying a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. "Ma," he said when I opened the door. His voice had a rawness I hadn't heard since he was a boy. He sat at the edge of the study doorway, not quite inside, not quite out. I didn't know the full shape of it, he said. I was afraid of losing them, so I kept trying to keep the peace. He looked at his hands. It wasn't peace, it was me avoiding choosing you. He took a breath. I'm sorry for laughing when they laughed, for standing still when I should have stepped between you and them. I can't undo it, but I can try to be different. Apologies don't fix ledger entries, but they can start something. Then help, I said. Help me finish this. Help make sure no one in this family does this again. He nodded like a man accepting sentencing he'd written himself. And for once, his actions matched his words. He came to meetings, he sat through depositions, he answered questions honestly. That, more than I'm sorry, was what started to mend something inside me. The civil cases slowly resolved. Restitution here, oversight there. No jail time, but plenty of daylight. In a way, that was the best justice we could have asked for. Not a spectacle, but a record. The community learned to treat certain last names with caution. Certain doors, financial doors, legal doors, social doors, quietly closed on the people who had once felt entitled to everything. As for me, I kept my life modest. I fixed what needed fixing with proper contracts, signed and dated. I set up a small trust for the day I might not be able to handle things myself. And I kept the study as Robert left it. On summer evenings, the Florida light slides in low and turns the dust into golden confetti. I sit in his chair, the ledger open, the brass key resting on the blotter. The house feels different now. The silence is no longer the brittle quiet of being watched. It's the solid kind, the kind you choose. The same family that mocked my tears at Robert's funeral once believed they could walk through any door in my life just because it was there. I closed those doors. Not with shouting, not with revenge. With documents, with deadlines, with deadbolts, with a judge's order, with a simple, stubborn refusal to bend. If any part of this story feels familiar, if you know the taste of being made small by people you thought you could trust, remember this. Record what you can. Keep copies. Talk to people who understand the law where you live. Don't let anyone rush you into signing away your future just because you're grieving. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a woman in her 70s in a small Florida house quietly closing every door that was once used against her. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need courage right now. Leave a comment if you've lived something similar or if you have questions. This community is here to listen. And if you'd like to hear more stories of quiet strength and unexpected vindication, you're welcome to subscribe.